In this week's Voices of Valor, I sat down with Chuck Sewell. He's a retired Army truck mechanic with 4 years of service. During his time in the military, he specialized in maintaining and ensuring the readiness of critical equipment in the Vietnam War. He's sharing his story with us. So kind of tell me why you decided to join the military.
Well, I was a young man. I was 19 years old. There was a war going on in Vietnam, and it was probably one of the most intense things in our country at that time. And I didn't want to be drafted. I thought if I enlisted, I would at least get to do a job that wouldn't involve infantry combat. And so I decided I would enlist because I knew it was just a matter of time before I was drafted into the Army. And so when I went to enlist, I had to go take a series of tests to determine what I might be qualified to do. And I scored very high, and what I really wanted to do was go into aviation because helicopters were the big thing at that time. And I wanted to go into helicopter maintenance or some type of helicopter aviation. So when I took the tests, I did qualify for that, so that was my first choice. They did give you choices. And then my second choice was fixed wing aircraft, which the Army didn't have very many of at that time. And then the third was automotive maintenance, and that's a wide spectrum of things in the U.S. military. So the only thing that was available that I could go to at that point was something in automotive maintenance. So after I completed basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and went to wheel mechanic school for wheeled vehicles in the military. And at that time, all of the branches of the military used the same vehicles. And when I finished that training, I went back to Fort Benning, Georgia, because I was selected to go to a different school that required more skill and the aptitude to do it. So I went to track mechanics school at Fort Benning, Georgia, and that was another 8 weeks of training, but it was very intense, and it didn't have a lot of the usual aspects of Army life. They wanted you to complete the school and have a good knowledge of what you were to do. And when school was completed, I got orders to go to Vietnam. So I got to go home I got 10 days of travel time to go from Fort Benning, Georgia to Oakland, California. So from there I went home, spent some time at home with my family and my fiance, which is now my wife, and then went to Oakland, California. And then that was the reception and overseas replacement center for the Army on the West Coast. And not only did troops go to Vietnam from there, but they went to Korea, the Philippines, Japan, pretty much all over Southeast Asia. Some lucky ones only had to go to Hawaii. And then when went to the replacement center at Oakland, California, we went to Travis Air Force Base in California and flew to Vietnam on commercial airliner. Plane went from Travis Air Force Base to Honolulu, Hawaii, which was a beautiful place, and then it went to the Philippines at Clark Air Force Base, which no longer exists. I think a volcano destroyed that after all those years, and then went from there to Vietnam. Actually landed at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, which is right outside of Saigon. Then from Tan Son Nhut Air Base, they took us to the in-country replacement center, which was in Long Binh, Vietnam. And while we were there, they gave you labor jobs to do while you were waiting to get shipped out to a unit. So we did things like fill sandbags and help build do the maintenance work around the replacement center, which was just an Army camp with tents and mud and a perimeter around it. And then from Long Been at the 90th Replacement Center, I got sent to the 9th Infantry Division, which was from Long Been to the division headquarters was only about probably 20 kilometers down the road. And so I went to the 9th Division, and all new replacement people that came into the 9th Division had to spend a week at the Old Reliable training camp. And what they did there is it was just like going through basic training again. They shaved your head, gave you new uniforms to wear, the jungle uniforms, and then they put you through a week of intense training because you were more than likely going to a combat unit. And so once that training was completed, then they sent you out to one of the combat units of the 9th Infantry Division. So I went, and the 9th Division was in several different locations. They didn't have the whole division just operating in one area. They had part of the division operating in the area around the division base camp, and then they had 2 brigades of the division in the Mekong Delta. And so I got sent to the 5th Mechanized Battalion, 60th Infantry in the Mekong Delta, which was it's the only mechanized infantry unit the Army had in the Mekong Delta at that time. And if you look on a map of Vietnam, that's an enormous area, but it's a rice growing area, so you can imagine it's swampy. There isn't a lot of areas where you can take heavy vehicles into, but mechanized infantry units had armored personnel carriers, which were amphibious. They could swim, not real well, but they could go through all that mud and water down there. And so after my training was finished at the Old Reliable Academy, then I went to the 5th to the 60th as a new replacement. They had an expression for new people that came into an Army unit, like a combat unit. They were called the FNG, and I won't go into the words that is, but that's what you were referred to as the FNG when you got there. So you got all the distasteful jobs to do when you first got there, no matter what your MOS was, just to give you a little initiation to what you were going to be looking at doing while you were there.
Can you talk with me about one of your most memorable experiences while you're in the military?
Well, I would say that the most memorable experiences for me was all the combat that I was engaged in and participated in while I was in the 9th Infantry Division. The unit that I was in was had many missions, and there wasn't one that was just memorable on its own, but because they were all very intense engagements. And I would say that was the most memorable part of my experience in the Army. The things that our unit had to do, we had, I don't know how familiar you are with Army units, but infantry battalions have 3 line companies and a headquarters company, and the headquarters company has like the recon platoon in it, and the big mortar platoon, 4-deuce mortars. And then the line companies have all the rest of the grunts that are in the battalion. That's the regular infantrymen, and they're assigned all the tasks of searching for the enemy to find out where they're at in your area and engaging them. We also had to run armed escort duty for our own supply convoys, and we would pick them up at the south side of Saigon and run them down Highway 4 into the Delta, and sometimes all the way to Mito on the Mekong River, or sometimes from Mito to Dong Tam, which was the 9th Division base camp for one of the brigades. And the supply convoy was all trucks, and we had to mingle in with the truck convoy as we went down the highway carrying those supplies. And those were usually the most dangerous runs because they were done at night. The whole area that we were running on was called a free fire zone. So if we received incoming fire, we could engage the enemy immediately, no matter where we were at. The enemy had the advantage because that was a long drive through there, and they could engage us whenever they wanted, when it was advantageous for them. So they would usually engage us with rocket RPG rounds close in, and then the firefight would start from there, anything to hold up the progress of the convoy. And we would run that all night. It would take us all night to do that. and then we would go back to our base camp and get everything ready to go back out again the next night. We would do that for 2 weeks, and then we would rotate over to doing the battalion combat mission, and then the third week, we would go down to Dongtam, which was where the 2nd Brigade was at, and we would support the regular infantry units down there that weren't mechanized. So we were constantly rotating through those type of missions.
Kind of tell me how the military made you who you are today.
Well, I would say that I was given a lot of responsibility when I was in the Army. Once I had a lot of combat experience in those type of situations, which are very intense, they can be very unexpected, and you never know whether you're going to be caught on the receiving end of something in a bad way, or you're going to have the advantage right away. And that enabled you to maybe look at situations that may arise in a broader way, and also relying on people that you serve with, regardless of who they are, they're going to contribute to the success or the fortunate outcome of the situation you might be in. And so when I got out of the Army and went into a civilian job and stuff, I could tell that a lot of people I were working with that were in my age area and group, they had never experienced any of that. So sometimes it made me look at them as rather weak or inefficient. But I think that prepared me most for things in life, and I realized that sometimes situations or events that you're in are really not as bad as some people may think, because you've already experienced something far worse than that. And I've pretty much maintained that my entire life.
So tell me about, what advice would you give someone if they wanted to join the military now?
Well, I would probably tell them, if there's something that you've always wanted to do in life, now would be the time to try it. You know, because if you qualify in the military, they'll give you that opportunity. They'll pay for all the training and make sure you receive probably the best training you'll ever get. And then that way you can see what you're capable of doing. And there's so many opportunities in the military now when you go in. I know it's an all-volunteer military. When I was in, we had to draft, but and most of those jobs today have a certain amount of technology that's relevant.
So kind of tell me about how it was being in Vietnam away from your friends and family. How did you cope with that?
There were several things. The communication that was available at that time really wasn't a whole lot different than what my father experienced when he was in the military in World War II. He wrote letters home, received letters. To stay in contact with your family, you couldn't make phone calls. There was no facility to do that. Most of your day was revolved around the people that you basically live with and work with. And considering the situation that we were in, I would say those are probably some of the strongest ties I have of friendships. And a lot of those people are still my friends today.
Talk to me more about your father in World War II.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Well, my father was in the Army Air Force in World War II. He was actually an aviator. He was a flight engineer, and he went in early in World War II, and he received his flight engineer training at American Airlines, even though he was in the Army. And he went once he finished flight engineer school at LaGuardia in New York, he went to Bell Aircraft up by Niagara Falls and went to aircraft mechanic school. So he went to actually civilian schools as a person in the military. He didn't go to Europe. He went to Air Transport Command, and they flew planes to Alaska and to Hawaii, and that was part of the Asiatic Front during World War II. They flew planes up there to Alaska to give to the Russians during the war. They were our allies at that time. And he flew extensively when he was in the Army. His older brother actually went into the Army in 1941 before World War II started. He was in the Army Engineers, and he was in Alaska when the Dutch bomb when the Japanese bombed Dutch Harbor. He was up there building the airfields up there before we actually got into World War II. My dad's other two brothers, one went to Europe and flew in B-17s bombing Germany, and his other brother went to China and was in 14th Air Force in China. So they all served in World War II.
Did your love for aviation and why you wanted it to be your first choice come from your dad?
Well, probably a little bit, but I was always fascinated by airplanes. And it was always a big interest to me, even before my dad, before I was old enough to maybe understand what my father did in aviation.
And you say you loved working on the tanks?
Well,
Or
I
did
don't
you?
know if I loved working on them, but it was what I did, and I was quite good at it. A way that I was able to learn how to take bad situations and have a better outcome, you know, because when things broke down or were damaged by enemy fire, we had to move in and either make it work again or tow it away right in the middle of combat. So that was the uniqueness of the situation. There was no, well, we'll come back and do this tomorrow. It had to be right immediately. You had to make the decision. And I just got used to doing that all the time.
Talk about some of the mental capacity that it takes to be in the military.
One of the biggest things is being willing to accept the idea that you're going to be directed to do things that you may not want to do or wouldn't volunteer to do. And I think that's a lesson that was instilled in me when I went through basic training, realizing that I was being told to do things I probably would never do in my life, and do them without hesitation. And it was the form of training that paid off later on when I was in combat. When someone directs you to do something, you have to immediately do it. You can't think of the consequences. You have to be able to do it to the best of your ability and do it immediately when you're told to do it or directed to do it. Again, as I went on in life later on, I could tell people that had never been in that situation before. But that was probably a hard thing for me to accept when it was first presented to me. I just realized later on that that's probably one of the reasons I was able to survive all the combat I was in, is because I followed orders and followed instructions given to me. And you didn't change that.
Do you have one particular difficult instance that you can think of that stuck out?
Well, our company would run armed escort duty for the supply convoys coming in. We had to travel through the same area that we were going to come back through later that day or that night. And so what the enemy would do is they were aware of our how we did things. And so they would wait for us going north to pick up the supply convoys, and they would start picking our tracks off with rocket projectile rounds, RPGs, you know, which can cause a lot of disruption. Those things explode immediately when they would hit your track, and casualties would be quite high from those. When I was in B Company, our track was always the last track in the convoy. So that means everybody else went past the enemy, and then they would pick out their target. Well, we were the last ones, so we were the target. And the first time it happened, the enemy was close. I was track commander, sitting at track commander's hatch, and I had another guy driving. The guy that was driving was from Louisiana, and he was one of those Cajun guys, you know, that you have a little bit of a hard time understanding when you first talk to them. What happened was the enemy, I have to choose my words carefully here, the enemy actually fired 2 RPG rounds right into our track, and neither one exploded, which is a rarity. And as I looked down through the hatch, because I was sitting on top, and I looked down there, I could see these 2 like big blue glowing logs down there that hadn't exploded. I knew what they were. So I pulled my feet up out of there, and the track started to slow down, and everybody, the rest of the guys on the track wanted us to stop, and I went, we can't stop, we have to keep going. So I told the guy driving it, his name was actually Donald Walker, I said, you need to keep going until this thing quits. So we kept driving, and of course the convoy kept getting further away from us, and I'm trying to reach them on the radio, and then I realized that when the one rocket round came in, it actually broke part of the radio. I still had a cord and a speaker to talk into, but the rest of the radio was damaged. They didn't even know it had happened. So we drove the track until it quit running, and then we got everybody off and got our gear, and we hiked out of there on foot till we got away from the enemy, far enough away, and then we had to wait till the company came back and picked us up. But that was not a good thought in my mind of what may happen that night.
Yeah, does that make you wonder? You have these logs and they didn't explode. Does that make you wonder why you're here?
Yeah, I guess I was just it was fortunate, good luck. None of us got hurt. We didn't at all, and the track, of course, burned up and blew up and everything afterwards, because those things eventually did explode, but nobody got hurt. And usually when those things went in and hit a target, they immediately exploded. And I don't know to this day why that didn't happen.
So talk to me now about the chapter that you're with now.
The Vietnam Veterans Chapter 749 that I'm in Morehead City. We have probably about 30 members. We have probably about 14 that are active and participate in things. And at one time, I guess the chapter was much larger than it is now. I actually joined this chapter because I was in one in Cleveland, which was quite large. That chapter I was in Cleveland probably had about 180 members in it. I don't think this one was ever that large to begin with. And after I got there, they decided that I could be vice president of the chapter. You know, I don't know any of these people, but I transferred down there, and then they weren't very active at doing things. You know, a lot of the guys are older, they belonged to other organizations or didn't really want to do anything. So the chapter president died. He'd been in the Marine Corps. He had illnesses that were development from Agent Orange poisoning. And when he passed away, we didn't have a way of changing over the leadership of the chapter. You know, and most of those guys didn't know me very well. A lot of them had been in the chapter for 20 or more years. You know, and I was like an outsider when I came in. They tolerated me, but didn't embrace too much of it. And so I had to take over the duties of this, and this was during COVID, so that made it even worse, because these guys wouldn't even come to the chapter meetings for fear that they would get COVID or be exposed to it. And then since we were having our meetings at Carteret County Hospital, they gave us a room to have them each month. They closed that off entirely, so we didn't even have a place to go have meetings. So since that time, I got elected to be the chapter president, and we have our secretary has been in the chapter for a while, but what happened is our treasurer got ill and died unexpectedly, and we didn't even know he had passed away until we saw the obit in the local paper that his wife had put in. We didn't even, and he had all of our finances, and
That would have been very shocking and surprising.
it was. So it created a whole bunch of problems that we've just recently rectified in the last 6 months. What I actually brought for you was just some pictures of some things I have from when I was in Vietnam as a much younger man. And then there's also some paperwork that I received from the U.S. Army that the unit I was in Vietnam received a U.S. Army Valor Unit citation for fighting the enemy, the Viet Cong and the NVA in the Cholon section of Saigon during the Tet Offensive. And that award wasn't presented to the unit till probably a year and a half later. And the orders that I got for it actually came from the Department of the Army along with my Purple Heart certificate after all that time. And I was still in the Army at that time. But I never saw the actual write-up for the award. And when I asked for some information from the Army about some combat operations I was in, they sent me a letter that said, oh yeah, by the way, here's the write-up for your unit in Vietnam. And when you won the U.S. Army Valorous Unit Citation, you were one of the people that actually participated in the event. And it said you were originally recommended for the Presidential Unit Citation, which for a small unit, that's very unusual. They usually want that for a bigger unit. Like, say, if it was in the Navy, a ship gets a Presidential Unit Citation, or a very large Army unit gets, or Marine unit gets it for combat. But we were just two companies, which is only about a little over 200 men. And so I did bring that with me if you want to look at it, but it's quite interesting. I was actually wounded in combat during that combat operation in the Cholon section of Saigon during the Tet Offensive. I got seriously wounded. I got shot in the neck when I was in that combat operation. So after that operation was over, during the day I was medevaced out and sent to an Army hospital, and actually in Don Sanut, where I came in. And I went to Third Field Hospital, and they didn't close serious wounds or operate on serious wounds in Vietnam, so I went to Japan. And I was in 249th General Hospital in Japan. And then when I was able to travel from there, I came back to the States, and I went to Valley Forge Army Hospital in Pennsylvania, which is now closed.
Shot in the neck.
Yes.
What was your recovery like?
Well, probably beneficial to me while I was a young person, so, you know, so that helped heal it, but it was serious enough that I wasn't sure when I was going to be released from the hospital because the healing was so long. But I recovered enough, and I left the hospital and went home on leave and got married to my wife, and went down to Fort Hood, Texas, and spent the last 16 months I had in the Army at Fort Hood, Texas.
And what was your wife's reaction when she found out you got hurt?
Oh, it was pretty pretty dramatic, because when I was in the hospital in Japan at the 249th, they had us in a ward, and they were preparing us all for surgery the next day because all of us were seriously wounded. And the Red Cross came in and gave us a pencil, you know, like one of those little pencils that you get at miniature golf ranges. They gave us a little pencil like that, and they gave us some stationery and an envelope, and told us to write our family at home. Only enough, they gave you one envelope, so I wrote a letter, explained to my mom and dad what happened, and to ask them to let my wife know that I was injured, and mailed that to them from Japan. And by the time they got that and got it home, I was already done in the hospital in Japan and was already back coming home. And my wife found out about it, and she tried tracking me down, and she finally got through to somebody in Japan. They said, oh, he's coming home. You can see him. He's going to the East Coast. So then my wife came to see me in the hospital, and my mom and my wife came to see me in the hospital in Valley Forge.
Well, I'm glad you're okay and you're
Yeah,
here
I am
talking with
too.
us today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.